coming down. And here we're looking down the side of the rock here, more of the deep channels.
So is this recognized by anyone as being this site?
It's not officially recognized. Again, this is one of the discoveries that's not recognized by the majority. And the next slide here, we see the deep channel, about 6 feet deep, where the baffle rock was placed in here, strategically placed. It's a wedge-shaped rock, forced straight down in there. And then here's the back side of it. You can see again.
Oh, that is a massive stone when you see it from that angle.
It's very large, and it's wedged vertically in there, like it was placed by the human hand in some way or another.
Yeah.
So, and just above this, we'll take a look to the right of this, but again, you can see the baffle rock, and then where the water would have run downhill out into the encampment to give refreshing water to the children of Israel.
Now, have there been any artifacts found out there, like some pottery and things?
Well, Ron Wyatt did find some pottery, grinding millstone out there. So artifacts have been found in the encampment area.
So regardless of what you want to believe, people did live there at some point.
Yes, there's evidence, yes. And using Ron's subsurface interface radar and gold detecting equipment, he did find an area where he was getting a reading for gold, where some of the people could have been buried in that encampment area.
Oh, so this so they wore their gold, and so this is a cemetery. After they were buried, they wore their gold to their death.
So some were buried with their gold. So again, this is a distant view. We can see way out in the valley there, and just above this site, above where the baffle rock is, we can see an area in this spot. This is probably 40 feet from the baffle rock. And this area here, this appears to have been the area of the source of the water that was coming out. And here you can see the exact hole. It appears that water was shooting out of this hole and running downhill. And you can see the water here, the rocks here have been worn smooth. But so that's the Kadesh Barnea that Ron Wyatt believes is the real site of the event where Moses sinned.
The second striking of the rock.
The second, yes.
A different location.
Yes.
Interesting. All right. All right, well, we're going to get into Mount Sinai now. We have another interesting presentation here, Kevin. So tell us about Mount Sinai.
So this is a photo taken in Saudi Arabia looking back across over to Egypt. This would be a sunset photo. You can see the nice palm trees here in the foreground. But some people are probably asking, why are you over in Saudi Arabia? The reason we're in Saudi Arabia, as we can see on the map here, is because the Red Sea crossing that we saw earlier is found at the Nuweiba Beach in the Sinai Peninsula, and it's in the Gulf of Aqaba. And Midian is where Mount Sinai should be. Midian is in Saudi Arabia, near the mountain here, Mount Sinai. All maps that are historically accurate will show Midian over here in this area of Saudi Arabia. Midian is where Moses fled to escape the punishment of killing the Egyptian. And 40 years later, he was at the mountain of God. And
because you will worship me on this mountain.
Yes, he was to bring the children of Israel back to this mountain, the fire incident with the burning bush. So he was in Midian at that point, and he was to bring the people back to that location. So we want to be looking in Saudi Arabia. So,
you know what I find interesting too is even though Ron Wyatt and Michael Rood and others say it's here, they're not the only ones. You have on your website some other quotes from some very knowledgeable and notable people.
Yes.
For example, Dr. Roy Knutson, he's a professor of biblical archaeology, says the visible evidence is quite overwhelming that the location of the true Mount Sinai has been discovered in Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Herschel Shanks, you mentioned Herschel Shanks to me when we were talking before the program. He says Jabal al-Laz is most likely the site for Mount Sinai. And then Dr. Dean McKenzie, who is a professor emeritus at the University of Oregon, says the evidence points to northwest Saudi Arabia as the location of the actual Mount Sinai.
Yeah, so there are, quote, authorities out there that are agreeing, yes, this is the correct mountain. And this is the place where Ron, he crossed the border in 1984 on foot from Jordan into Saudi Arabia, he and his sons, and they walked through the desert. It was a very strenuous hike for them, and that's when he was taken prisoner, supposedly, being accused of being an Israeli spy. But Ron Wyatt found this mountain there, and he asked the locals, and the locals said, Jebel Musa Hena, or the Mountain of Moses is here. And so you've got a local tradition out there that, yes, this is the Mountain of Moses. And of course, they do respect Moses, the Muslims do.
Now, there's two names there, Jabal al-Lawz and Jebel Musa?
Yeah, Jebel Musa Hena. They call it the
Hena.
Mountain of Moses.
Okay.
Yeah, is what they call it.
And we're talking about the same place?
Yes, same place. Same as Jebel al-Lawz, yes. And so here is the beach on the Saudi Arabian side of the crossing site there.
Where the Israelites came over,
yes,
from Nueva.
And that's where we saw in the previous segment where the chariot wheel was found.
Ah, okay.
In these waters here, so this is a continuation of the crossing site. And so from the beach area, you can also see where the column was cut down. The column that had the writing on it, death, Mizraim, Pharaoh, Yahweh, Solomon, water. So this was a column marking the spot for the Red Sea crossing. The authorities cut it down and took it someplace. We don't know where it is.
And what's interesting, there's two columns, and people might say, oh, well, that's just each culture had their own traditions of raising columns for this and that. But these are matching columns. They're the same granite.
Yes, they're from opposite sides of the crossing site, strategically placed, and then you have the chariot parts in these same waters. So they were placed there on purpose, for a reason. Pillars were used, in ancient times to mark places or events. And so, we can trust these columns in this particular case. Solomon's Seaport was just to the north. He knew of this area, what was going on here. So in our next slide here, we can see Tim Mahoney in the foreground, and in the background, you can see the split rock, the first split rock.
Yes, okay.
So we went for the second one, back to the first one here. And of course, Tim Mahoney, he is with the website patternsofevidence.com. They're putting together a documentary on this and the Red Sea crossing. But you can see in the distance the split rock on top of a 300-foot tall hill.